On July the 28th of 2024, Maryland woman Marilyn Waldecker was at a shopping center in Sterling, Virginia, when she spotted a man getting into her Kia Sorento. The carjacker was identified as El Salvador native Jose Aguilar Martinez, who was in the U.S. illegally and possessed a California driver's license. 54-year-old Waldecker tried to prevent him from driving off, but Aguilar Martinez ran her over with her own car. First responders pronounced her dead at the scene. The Silver Spring woman had reportedly traveled to Northern Virginia to visit her ailing mother at the time of her death. A manhunt was launched in the fatal crash's wake, and it ended less than an hour later when the 21-year-old suspect was arrested at gunpoint in Trumpet Circle. He was booked at Loudoun County Adult Detention Center and held without bond. Aguilar Martinez was initially charged with felony carjacking, but additional charges, including murder, were expected to follow. Number 6. Jonathan Adam LeCompte. 28-year-old Ricky Alex Driggers attempted to steal a utility pickup truck from a roadside crew on West 5th Street in Lumberton, North Carolina, on March the 18th of 2024. In a video that subsequently became viral, Good Samaritan Jonathan Adam LeCompte confronted Driggers, yelling, "Don't get in the goddamn truck, fool!" 38-year-old LeCompte brandished a pistol and shot at the suspect 4 times but failed to stop him. Driggers then put the truck in reverse, prompting LeCompte to warn others at the scene, "Get out the way, he's going to run into us." Moments later, as LeCompte ran away, Driggers accelerated and mowed him down. The impact propelled LeCompte into the air and he sustained devastating injuries, to which he succumbed at a local hospital. Driggers fled the scene in the stolen vehicle and was pursued by the Lumberton Police Department until he crashed on Selma Road near Highway 41. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder, attempted common law robbery, larceny of a motor vehicle, and felony fleeing to elude. Number 5. Jabz Clark, Corey Richardson, and Jacob Land. Law enforcement officers in Stafford, Virginia, were called to an Anytime Fitness location on an October afternoon in 2021 following reports that a brawl had broken out in the parking lot. 3 youths had reportedly used a baseball bat in their attempt to carjack an unnamed gym member. The would-be victim was an MMA practitioner, and even though he was struck with the bat multiple times, he used his training to fight back. His attackers were identified as teenagers Jabz Clark and Corey Richardson and 20-year-old Jacob Land. At some point during the melee, the victim dropped his car keys and one of the suspects grabbed them. He got behind the wheel of the man's vehicle, but he and his accomplices were unable to flee as they didn't know how to drive cars with manual transmission. As other gym goers gathered at the scene, Clark, Richardson, and Land returned to their Acura sedan and drove off. They were spotted by local law enforcement, who initiated a traffic stop, but the youths didn't comply and headed northbound on I-95, reaching speeds close to 100 miles per hour. Upon passing mile marker 145, they crashed through the barrier arm, crossed onto the HOV lanes, and headed northbound, driving oppositely from traffic. A perimeter was set up in the area by Stafford County deputies, Virginia State Police, and soldiers from a Marine Corps base in Quantico. Clark, Richardson, and Land eventually abandoned their vehicle and tried to flee into the woods, whereupon they were tracked down by a Stafford County sergeant with a canine unit named Titan. According to an arrest report, 2 of the suspects complied and surrendered, while a third incorrectly judged his own speed, or canine Titan speed, and attempted to run away. The police dog was released and took the youth down within 50 yards. Clark, Richardson, and Land were taken into custody and faced a plethora of charges that included carjacking, robbery, conspiracy, and assault. Number 4. Catherine Altagracia Guerrero de Aguas Vivas. On April the 11th of 2024, Florida woman Catherine Altagracia Guerrero de Aguas Vivas left her homestead residence in her Dodge Durango and headed towards the Castleberry home of 27-year-old Giovanni Crespo Hernandez. Aguas Vivas was reportedly meant to meet the latter and retrieve $170,000, allegedly stemming from drug trafficking activities. How she'd come to be involved in transporting drug money remained unclear. but Crespo Hernandez called another man, Jordanish Torres Garcia, and they hatched a plan to rob the woman. Torres Garcia recruited Kevin Ocasio Justiniano and Rodriguez Bonilla, both of whom were in their 20s. Shortly after leaving Crespo Hernandez's home, and as she was driving through Winter Springs, Aguas Vivas called her husband, Miguel, to tell him that she was being followed by a green Acura. He told her to keep driving no matter what, but neither of them alerted law enforcement. The Acura then rammed Aguas Vivas' vehicle from behind. While the woman was stopped at a red light, a man wearing a ski mask emerged from the Acura with a pistol in hand. The assailant, later identified as Torres Garcia, pointed the gun at Aguas Vivas and forced his way into the Durango. He got in the back seat and ordered the woman to follow the Acura, which was being driven by Ocasio Justiniano. A witness driving behind Aguas Vivas recorded the broad daylight carjacking. In a 911 call released by the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, the witness reported, "You need to do something now because I don't know what's going on." At some point in the next hour, Ocasio Justiniano met with Bonilla, who gave him a 10mm pistol. Roughly 2 hours after the brazen carjacking had been caught on video, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office responded to reports of smoke and gunfire at a construction site. Officers arrived to find Aguas Vivas' charred remains in her burnt-out SUV. She'd been executed via multiple gunshots. From the scene, officers recovered a dozen 10mm shell casings and one bullet. According to June updates on the case, Aguas Vivas' husband was no longer cooperating with investigators, who were still working to determine the couple's role in a complex drug operation with possible ties to Puerto Rico. Seminole County Sheriff Dennis Lemmer told the media, "Clearly there's a drugs and money nexus here. The FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service took over the probe. Torres Garcia, Ocasio Justiniano, Crespo Hernandez, and Rodriguez Bonilla were arrested and indicted on the charges of carjacking resulting in death, kidnapping resulting in death, and use of a firearm during and in relation to a violent crime resulting in death. Another murder case paralleled that of Aguas Vivas. The green Acura involved in the kidnapping had been towed from an Orange County apartment complex on March the 19th of 2024 for being illegally parked. On April the 10th, the day before Aguas Vivas was kidnapped, tow truck driver Juan Luis Cintron Garcia was ambushed outside his home in the Taft neighborhood of Orange County. A green Acura stopped in the street near his residence and two suspects got out, guns blazing. Over 100 rounds were fired at 39-year-old Garcia and his home, where his family lived. Some of the rounds used to kill the tow truck driver matched those in the Aguas Vivas murder, but the connection between the two cases remained unclear as of the latest information available to the media. Number 3. Kenttrell Flowers. On July the 5th of 2024, two U.S. Marshals were parked outside the Northwest Washington, D.C. home of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Shortly after 1 a.m., 18-year-old Kenttrell Flowers approached the driver's side window of one of the unmarked vehicles, armed with a Smith & Wesson 40 VE handgun. Flowers pointed the firearm at an officer named by Metro PD as Deputy U.S. Marshal Black and attempted to carjack him. In the moments that followed, the marshal drew his service weapon and shot at Flowers 4 times through the window, striking him in the mouth. A second officer also opened fire on the teenage criminal. He was transported to a local hospital and treated for non-fatal injuries, after which he was charged with armed carjacking, carrying a pistol without a license, and possession of a large-capacity ammunition feeding device. The marshals involved in the shooting, who were part of Sotomayor's security detail, were unharmed, and the incident was believed to have been a random occurrence unconnected with the justice's position. Today's topic was requested by Isaac Ortiz 4728, Random Clips 894, and Candice Vidito. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Annah Blanchard. On October the 23rd of 2019, Annah Blanchard, a student at Southern Union Community College in Alabama, messaged her roommate to say she was on her way home. The 19-year-old was never heard from again. and her last confirmed sighting was on CCTV footage at a Chevron gas station in Auburn. On October the 24th, the team was reported missing to the Auburn Police Department, and a task force was assembled to carry out a search. It involved the authorities in Alabama as well as the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. The disappearance attracted national attention and extensive media coverage. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey offered $5,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Blanchard's stepfather, UFC heavyweight fighter Walt Harris, and others in the MMA promotion, including President Dana White and light heavyweight champion John Jones, put up additional rewards. On October the 25th, Blanchard's black 2017 Honda CR-V was found abandoned near an apartment complex in Montgomery. There was blood on the front passenger seat, a bullet hole in the passenger side door, and shell casings in the left cup holder. Forensic investigators determined that the scene indicated someone had suffered a life-threatening injury. Following an examination of the gas station surveillance footage, 29-year-old Montgomery man Ibrahim Yazid was identified as a person of interest in Blanchard's disappearance. He was captured entering the passenger side of her car with a witness reporting that he'd forced her into the vehicle. On November the 7th of 2019, an arrest warrant for first-degree kidnapping was issued for Yazid, and he was tracked down by the U.S. Marshals. In Florida, he refused to obey the officer's commands, tried to flee, and had to be subdued. Yazid, who was pictured with a severely swollen eye in his booking photo, was subsequently extradited to Alabama. After the arrest of 2 additional suspects with knowledge of the case, investigators determined that Yazid had attempted to carjack Blanchard at gunpoint and that he fatally shot her because she reportedly went for the gun. Her remains were discovered later on in November in a wooded area of Mason County. The body was clad in the clothes Blanchard had worn on the day she went missing, and there was a bullet hole in her skull. Updates on the case from July of 2024 indicated that Yazid was still awaiting trial following delays related to the COVID-19 pandemic. He faced 2 counts of capital murder, one for committing a murder in a car through the use of a deadly weapon while the victim was in the vehicle, and the other for committing a murder during a kidnapping in the first degree. The DA's office sought the death penalty while the judge issued a gag order preventing Yazid's attorneys, prosecutors, and witnesses from speaking to the media about the case. At the time of the Blanchard murder, Yazid was free on a $295,000 bond, having been charged with possession of marijuana, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. The charges were connected to a 2019 hotel raid in which he and several accomplices had beaten and robbed 2 men, leaving one of them unconscious, unresponsive, severely injured, and near death. Some of Yazid's past crimes included an attack carried out in 2012 in which he tried to kill 2 police officers by ramming his car into theirs. Yazid would also be charged with the 2018 murder of homeless man Stephen Hamby, whom he was accused of gunning down, and the attempted murder of homeless woman Geraldine Torley. Yazid had allegedly shot the latter in the face during the same incident. Given the fact that in spite of his criminal past he was free at the time of Blanchard's murder, a new law was created. In February of 2020, the Alabama House of Representatives voted 104-0 in favor of Anna's law, which allowed a judge to deny bail to violent offenders. The Alabama Senate passed it by a vote of 30-0, and Governor Ivey signed it in June of 2021. If you're still craving more jaw-dropping stories, stay tuned till after number 1, because we've got for you our previous release from a while ago of When Cemeteries Go Wrong coming up. Number 1, Artel Cunningham. A one-man carjacking spree across Washington, D.C. and Maryland ended in 3 deaths in the winter of 2024. 28-year-old Artel Cunningham's rampage unfolded over the course of 11 hours and began with an attempted carjacking of father of 3, Mike Gill. On the evening of January the 29th, the latter was waiting to pick up his wife in Mount Vernon Square in Washington, D.C. Cunningham got inside 56-year-old Gill's vehicle and within a minute shot him. The victim's wife found him bleeding and lying outside of the car. Gill, who was the chief of staff at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission during President Donald Trump's administration, died several days later. Within an hour of shooting Gill, Cunningham unsuccessfully tried to carjack another vehicle on 3rd Street Northeast. He then held 35-year-old driver Alberto Vasquez Jr. at gunpoint and demanded his car keys. Even though Vasquez surrendered the keys, Cunningham still shot him dead in front of his girlfriend. He then took off in the victim's 2016 grey Chrysler 200, and video showed him speeding away with the car door still open. The carjacker subsequently ditched the vehicle and stole a Toyota Camry from a rideshare driver in Montgomery County, Maryland. While in Tacoma Park, Cunningham called another rideshare and jacked a Nissan Rogue. At 2:15 a.m. the following day, a Maryland Transportation Authority officer was assisting with a work zone closure on the ramp from northbound I-95 to I-395 in Baltimore. Cunningham drove by in the Nissan and fired at the officer but missed. About 15 minutes later, a Maryland state trooper was in Laurel, helping a stranded driver on southbound I-95 near Route 198. Cunningham pulled up and opened fire, shattering the police cruiser's windshield, but the trooper took cover and emerged unscathed. The spree continued with Cunningham shooting at a marked DC police cruiser on DC 295 near Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast at around 3 a.m. At least one bullet hit the driver's side door, but once more no injuries were reported. Cunningham was eventually tracked down to the parking lot of a laundromat on Annapolis Road in New Carrollton. He reportedly charged local police officers with a gun in each hand and was shot dead. In body cam footage of the shooting's aftermath, an officer was heard yelling, "Don't touch the guns, don't touch the guns." As law enforcement approached the unresponsive suspect, they kicked the guns out of his reach and handcuffed him. In accordance with standard safety practices, one of the cops started doing CPR on Cunningham, but he couldn't be revived. His family believed that he was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of his spree.
Number 9. Maria Elizabeth Pena Echeverria. Teenager Maria Elizabeth Pena Echeverria was arrested by North Carolina law enforcement in May of 2021 in connection to a man's brutal killing at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Raleigh. According to an official press release, 69-year-old James Lacey Taylor had been found critically injured on the cemetery's grounds on the night of May the 28th. He was officially pronounced dead upon being transported to a nearby hospital. People who'd been present at the graveyard around the time of the incident told investigators that they'd seen 2 men and a woman fleeing the scene in 2 separate vehicles, a dark-colored pickup truck and a sedan that was either brown or blue. A state worker subsequently came upon a pile of clothes, shoes, and latex gloves positioned near a splatter of blood on the ground, prompting them to dial 911. Officers found Taylor gravely wounded, a short distance from the rest of the articles of evidence. The day after Pena Echeverria's arrest, the authorities announced that 2 additional teenage suspects, one of whom was named as Jonathan Dan Villanueva Gala, had been taken into custody on suspicion of being involved in Taylor's murder. When the shooting occurred, Villanueva Gala was reportedly out on parole for previous convictions that included driving while impaired and felony breaking and entering. Number 8. Yolanda Galia. Police in Killeen, Texas, received reports of a shooting at the Calvary Baptist Church Garden of Memories Cemetery shortly after 5 p.m. on March the 22nd of 2022. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a pair of gunshot victims, one of whom was treated for minor injuries by emergency responders and released a short time later. The other victim, 52-year-old Yolanda Galia, had sustained far more severe injuries, and she was ultimately pronounced dead about 2 hours later. In the incident's aftermath, it was detailed how on the day of her death, Galia had gone to the cemetery to visit her deceased son's gravesite on what would have been his 22nd birthday. Although the cause of death for Galia's son wasn't specified in subsequent reports, Facebook posts from the young man's father indicated that he'd passed away on New Year's Day 2022. Killeen police immediately launched an investigation into the fatal shooting, but as of the case's most recent updates, a suspect hadn't yet been identified. Number 7. Elvira Navaro. New York woman Elvira Navaro was tending to graves at Baron Hirsch Cemetery in Staten Island on October the 28th of 2021 when a massive headstone toppled to the ground. According to the Navaro family's attorney, The 2,000-pound monument fell directly on top of the 53-year-old woman while she was working next to her son, Anthony Rosales. Navaro was taken to Richmond University Medical Center, where she ultimately died as a result of her crushing injuries. On the day of the tragic accident, Navaro and her son had been dispatched to the Graniteville burial grounds to perform some work at the site on behalf of their third-party employer. In the incident's aftermath, the family filed a negligence lawsuit in Manhattan Supreme Court against the Barrenhurst Cemetery Association. The civil litigation alleged that Navaro's death had been directly caused by the organization's failure to properly maintain the grounds. Number 6. Sheamus Buram. On the morning of Christmas Eve 2021, the Meridian Police Department in Mississippi received a call about 2 men roaming through Mecklemore Cemetery with metal detectors. Officers were dispatched to the scene a short time later and came upon a man later identified as Sheamus Buram as he was in the process of digging up a grave. In a statement released by the department's police patrol sergeant, the suspect hadn't dug very deep by the time he was found by law enforcement, who immediately took him into custody. Buram was consequently charged with desecration of a cemetery or corpses, a misdemeanor in the state of Mississippi. Number 5. The Shante King Sr.'s funeral. On June the 2nd of 2022, gunfire broke out during an afternoon funeral at the Graceland Cemetery in Racine, Wisconsin. The memorial service, as was detailed in subsequent reports, was being held in honor of Shante King Sr., a local man who'd been killed by the police during a shootout precipitated by a contentious traffic stop. The Racine chief of police indicated that officers had initially pulled King over to execute a search warrant for a felon in possession of a gun. The situation abruptly escalated after King had got out of his vehicle and started fleeing on foot. Officers gave chase and eventually resorted to shooting the man because he'd reportedly refused to drop his weapon. In the wake of the funeral shooting, investigators gathered from witness testimony that there'd been between 20 and 30 gunshots fired in total. It subsequently emerged that as many as 5 mourners had been injured in the incident, some of whom were identified as members of King's family. Fortunately, no one was killed in the attack. As of the latest updates on the matter, Racine police were still working to identify the individual or group responsible for the incident. Number 4. Dale LaPrade. In September of 2018, the authorities in Bridgeport, Connecticut, received reports that more than 100 graves at Park City Cemetery had been disturbed, stacked, or desecrated. City officials launched an investigation to ascertain the reason for the dilapidated condition of the grounds. Officers sent to inspect the area reportedly found disturbed dirt, garbage, and overturned headstones haphazardly strewn across the graveyard. Detectives also discovered bone fragments and pieces of caskets that dated back more than 100 years. Some of the detritus had been discarded on the ground of the cemetery, while other bits of debris were found in the woods nearby. In December of 2018, it was announced during a news conference that the police had arrested Dale LaPrade, the operator of the Park City Cemetery. She was accused of intentionally disturbing plots in the cemetery, some of which reportedly belonged to Civil War veterans, in order to create space for new graves. In the wake of LaPrade's arrest, it also emerged that the 64-year-old had allegedly embezzled more than $60,000 of the cemetery's money during her tenure as the historic site's manager. While awaiting her trial on charges of first-degree larceny, second-degree larceny, and interfering with the cemetery, LaPrade reportedly passed away from complications stemming from cardiovascular disease. Number 3. Jose Luis Torres Garcia. On February the 17th of 2020, several people were gunned down at the Perris Valley Cemetery in Perris, California. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department soon identified 33-year-old Jose Luis Torres Garcia as the prime suspect in what was a triple murder investigation. Garcia, a twice-deported Mexican national, was reportedly with the victims all night leading up to their violent deaths. While investigators didn't disclose a specific motive for the killings, suspicions arose that they were somehow connected to cartel violence south of the border. After reports surfaced that Garcia was wanted in connection to the incident, he fled California, triggering an extensive manhunt that extended into neighboring states. Law enforcement in Cheyenne, Wyoming, eventually spotted him driving a 2007 GMC Yukon on Interstate 80 and detained him without further incident. He was jailed at the Laramie County Detention Center pending his extradition back to California to stand trial for murder. Number 2. Brian Montavo Tolentino and Juan Lopez. The Lake County Sheriff's Office in Florida received reports of vandalism at Edgewood Cemetery in early December of 2020. Deputies who'd been dispatched to inspect the scene reportedly discovered that grave robbers had dug up 4 separate graves and stolen human remains from each of the burial sites. It was also determined that the vandals had damaged a 5th grave, which they'd ultimately abandoned without gaining access to it. In January of the following year, police announced that they'd identified a pair of suspects named as Brian Montavo Tolentino and Juan Lopez. During a news conference, local authorities detailed how the men had allegedly performed the grave robbery for ritualistic purposes prior to vandalizing the burial sites. Tolentino and Lopez had reportedly spit Bacardi rum on the ground and exhaled cigar smoke near the headstones, which was done in order to protect them from evil spirits. In doing so, they inadvertently provided law enforcement with evidence, as investigators subsequently used the DNA found on cigars left at the crime scene to identify them. It was further revealed that the vandals had targeted the burial sites of military veterans whom they'd believed to have stronger spirits. Tolentino and Lopez were booked into the Polk County Jail on 4 counts each of disturbing the contents of a grave and abuse of a dead body. Number 1. Moera Benjamin Longo. Arkansas police was made aware of a vandalism incident at Oakland Cemetery Park in Little Rock in the summer of 2020. As it was subsequently reported, an individual had spray-painted various phrases on a Confederate memorial obelisk and several other grave sites on the night of July the 9th. Investigators determined that the suspect had intended the graffiti to be a form of protest against the controversial structures erected in honor of key figures of the Confederate South during the American Civil War. The 20-foot stone monument was covered in politically charged phrases such as "Black Lives Matter," "No Justice, No Peace," as well as derogatory statements directed toward then-President Donald Trump. The police were able to use surveillance footage from the cemetery to identify the perpetrator as 30-year-old Moera Benjamin Longo. He was taken into custody on charges of first-degree criminal mischief and desecration or removal of a cemetery or grave marker. Officials publicly announced that the man had further been charged with conspiracy and use of explosive materials for malicious damage to federal property. The accusations were connected to an incident in which he'd allegedly thrown firebombs at police vehicles. Longo pleaded not guilty to each of the offenses, and his attorney filed a motion to have all his federal charges dismissed.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather there was no speed limit or no traffic jams? Let us know in the comments section below.